let's dive into the topic that you guys have most requested. All right. And so there was a light touch on this at the one day, and I want to go a little bit deeper on it with you, which is the concept of content, which is fundamentally traffic. All right. And so I'm going to break down a couple things that I think I have noticed within the community that are, let's call these mistakes that people are making that are preventing you from making more money. Okay. Let's rock and roll. So at the onset of this, the big question is, should you focus on getting more traffic? And for most businesses, the answer is yes, because the return on investments on increments are by definition incremental. Whereas if you can increase inputs 100-fold, they are orders of magnitude difference. And so if you have a conversion rate, let's call it of 2% on your about page, and that would be a benchmark, right? That would be about normal. 4% is the one for everything on Skool, but let's just say 4%, fine. So your average there. Okay, fine. Now you can tweak a lot of things to try and go from 4 to 5%. That would be a 20% improvement. But most times, if you were to take your income and raise it by 20%, you'd probably be happy. But especially if you're earlier on, you want to increase it order of magnitudes. And to be clear, if you're later on, you want to increase it order of magnitudes as well, because it will relatively be the same to you. And so going from $1,000 to $1,200 is the same as going from $1 million a month to 1.2 million. But much more fun to go from 1 million to 10 million, or from 1,000 a month to $10,000 a month or more. And so most of the large increases in revenue that occur come from order of magnitude implementations, things that change the dynamics of the game. And so one of the obvious ways of doing this is building traffic or increasing traffic through making content. And so I think that a lot of you are making bad content for a couple of reasons. Now, I'm going to specifically be talking more on the education side. So whether you educate consumers or businesses, either way, if you're trying to become an authority in the space, which most businesses are, then this will apply to you. So big picture, a lot of the content that's out there has what I would consider too little pre and too little post, meaning basically no preparation and no post-production, meaning it's just shit. On top of that, the actual content itself isn't really based on anything besides someone having some like verbal commitment to themselves that they're going to, quote, make content rather than solve problems for their audience or their customers. Okay. So big thing number one that I'll state outright, which is that if you have customers, when you make content, if they get value from that content, they will still ascribe it to the thing they bought from you. So fun fact is that you can retain customers on a purchased product by providing more free content, because your brain is not going to delineate where you've received value from, only that you receive value. So basically you'll continue to reinforce the positive association that someone in your audience has, customer or otherwise, when you make positive content. So that's reason number one, right? Reason number two is that it increases the likelihood that people who have not bought from you will buy from you in the future, whether they come from ads, they come from outbound, or they just come from the content itself, because they will consume other pieces of content. Now, what's interesting about this is that probably one of my largest changes in how I've seen business overall is my understanding of marketing to, quote, logical and emotional buyers. And so if you were to listen to my stuff years ago, I would have talked about logic and emotional buyers. And I think for the most part, that was because I hadn't spent a lot of time really diving into it. I kind of just like heard that it sounded smart enough. And so I just kind of repeated, and that's kind of how I went. But the more I've looked into it, the more I think that it's actually a question of how much information is required to make a decision. And so instead of being two people on either side, logical buyers and emotional buyers, it's actually a dollar sign on one side, which means that they've learned enough information to make a decision. And then where they sit on this continuum, right? So on all the way furthest away from the dollar, some people require a tremendous amount of information. Some people require very little information. Now, the reason that the information space oftentimes is very incestuous. People buy thing after thing after thing from different people. So it's a smaller pool of multiple purchase buyers from multiple potential vendors. And I think the reason for this is that most of the information education space doesn't know how to advertise to anyone beyond low information buyers. And oftentimes this is also entrepreneurs. And so entrepreneurs tend to be a little bit more risk-friendly, like we are risk-philic, if you will, rather than risk-phobic. So we're okay with risk, and so we're willing to make a decision with less information. So this is the type of person who makes a decision after 5 minutes of watching a video and says, sure, I'll spend $10,000. Where somebody else might say, hey, I need to check with my insurance. I got to check with my spouse. I need to consume, 10 pieces. I need to look at Google, Google Consumer Affairs. I need to do a whole bunch of research, right? And so here's the thing that I think everyone misses out on is that the reason that most digital direct response info type businesses stay small is because they don't know how to sell to high information buyers. And there are significantly more high information buyers than there are low information buyers. And so this is why most of them in general can't pass a certain revenue level. And it's because they basically sucked up all of the immediate 6-inch putts, the little tip-ins that they can make, and actually haven't been able to take the ball from 0 all the way to the end zone, right? They can just do 5-yard, 10-yard runs, and that's about it. And so typically that's because the nature of the marketing, the nature of the content that they put out is very offer-driven. Now, as the person who wrote the book on offers, I feel like disproportionately qualified to talk about this, which is that it is the fastest way to make money, which is make better offers. Now, when you're making those better offers, you will immediately tip in the people who are on the fence or ready or looking for something like this. So these are the most aware customers. So Eugene Schwartz talks about this in his book, Breakthrough Advertising, where he states that there's these levels of awareness, right? So at the top, you have unaware. So somebody has no idea you exist or the problem, whatever. Then you have problem aware. So they just know they have a problem. They don't know what's out there, but they just know they have a problem. So if you ever hear like, do you get up to pee 3 times a night? Or like, are you like it's playing with your kids, making you ashamed of your being out of shape? That's problem aware. Now, each of those hooks could lead me down to buying ashwagandha root or buying supplements or buying a gym membership, but it's problem. All right. The next is solution aware. All right. So this is the different types of solutions that exist. Underneath of that, you have product aware. So now you're comparing your product to somebody else's product. And then finally, you have most aware, which are typically people who are existing customers of yours who have purchased in the past that you try to get them to buy again. The last one is where most people stay, in most aware and product aware. And what you need to do is make promotions, you make offers, and this ultimately gets people to buy stuff. Ta-da! All right. Now, for us, with our content, we want to be able to make hooks to people further out in the awareness scale. And so the hook should be, if you want to go after a larger market, rather than what I see a lot of content is basically people just making an offer as their content, which is not content, right? Is that you want to make hooks relative specifically to solutions that already exist. That's a little bit bigger. Problems, which is going to be the biggest bucket. And then if you're like, how do you make a hook for the unaware people? It's usually based on curiosity. And so it's literally one of those, if you ever see those, the easiest place to look at this is like Google Display, because that's usually where like the oceans of traffic exist. When you see those crazy clickbait headlines that are like Nevada homeowners, like something, like you won't believe this, right? It could be something it could be selling solar. It could be selling insurance. Like you have no idea, but it's just the curiosity which gets you to take down and go down that funnel. And there's typically a lot more education that has to occur to get someone from not even knowing this industry exists to being able to make a purchasing decision in, call it 60 minutes, right? And so I will loop around to like, but okay, I'm getting this. How does this relate to content? Well, hopefully this is relating to content, but beyond that, if you're hearing this and thinking, okay, well, what do I do about this? Well, one is that the pre-search, the research you do prior to making your content, in my opinion, should one, be clear as to what stage of awareness you're going after. You're trying to go after problem, and those are the wider hooks for most people. And I would recommend if you're going to do stuff, that's a good place to be, or just solution aware stuff. Those are good places for you to make content around because it's going to be a little bit wider, you'll get more reach on it. All right. Now, you still want to make it about your stuff or something at least adjacent to your stuff. Otherwise, you'll have a meme account that just has a whole bunch of views and no one cares about you. All right. Because the point here is still to build a brand. All right. Now, here we are. Now we're catching up. So if the question here, and the reason that we're even talking about this is because we want to 10x the traffic to our about page, to our site, rather than thinking in increments, then there are basically two positions that I posit create the best brand loops, all right, the most reinforcement for a brand. So one is aspirational outcomes. The second is aspirational effort, which is inputs. So basically, you want a type of outcome that not many people in your space or that people who are your customers, more specifically, aspire to have. And this works both B2B and B2C. So I'll give you a couple examples. So Gymshark signed up C-Bum, right? And C-Bum, if you don't know who he is, he's the best bodybuilder in the world right now. He just retired, but like he was basically the GOAT of the industry for the last 6 or 7 years. And he is aspirational for fitness people. There's C-Bum. Ta-da, look at his physique. Look how good looking he is. Okay. So they make an association with CBUM in making content. Now, they can obviously afford CBUM. You can still make an association with someone by making content about CBUM, right? And so that's obviously not as strong, but it's still directionally correct. Now, the aspirational outcome, though, if you are the authority, is that you want to be the person who does it, obviously. Now, if you know the person who does it, that gives you some degree of transference, and not 100%. Now, for example, imagine I get, my podcast only has Elon, Zuck, Jeff Bezos, whatever, and no one else. It's like, well, you probably make very strong billionaire associations with me because they're all ultra wealthy billionaires or centibillionaires at this point. So that's the outcomes part. And I think that this is actually, if I had to be real, most of you guys are missing this, right? Which is that you haven't done anything yet. And so you want people to respect you. You want people to listen to your authority, but you can't actually answer the question, why should they? And I think if you can simply answer that question, which is why should I listen to you, in your content and remind people on a regular basis of whatever that aspirational outcome is, they're more likely to listen. Now, Warren Buffett gives very simple personal finance advice to people. Now, are there other people who are qualified to give personal finance advice and maybe even be better at it? I'll bet you Dave Ramsey's better at giving personal finance advice than Warren Buffett. Why? Because it's his whole business. So he knows what people struggle with probably more intimately than Warren Buffett does. But we will still listen to Warren Buffett because he's $100 billion. And so we figure if it works to get to $100 billion, I'm sure he can help me save up to pay my mortgage off. This is an important link that I'm trying to make here. North Face. If we know that their jackets can have someone stay warm at the top of Everest, then we can reasonably state that it'll keep us warm on our way to work while we're going from the house to the car and then the car to the place that we're eating or whatever, right? And so these aspirational outcomes basically serve as risk mitigation for your potential audience and customers. If it worked at this super extreme level, it'll probably work for me at my not nearly as extreme level. So that's from the outcome perspective. And I think many of you need to double down on that part, which is what can you say that no one else can say? What can you show that no one else can show? These are the aspirational outcomes that people will then listen to your very basic content about. I can make content about personal finance because people are like, he's rich. Okay, he can probably help me save some money. But I only get to say this very basic content sometimes because of the authority I have from this big outcome. And so a lot of people spend too much time, in my opinion, trying to work around facts. Like instead of trying to warp reality and lie or posture or misrepresent yourself, just state the facts and tell the truth. And if the truth and the facts aren't that compelling, change the truth and the facts, meaning change reality. Don't warp it, change it. Make reality different, and then state the facts and tell the truth about this new, much better reality. And I'll give you a story that I had. So I don't think you'd mind me sharing this. So I was talking to Mr. Beast about this concept, and I was like, "Yeah, I know we need to work on our headlines. They're a little bit too clickbaity." And I remember he stopped and he was like, "Absolutely not." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "You should absolutely have clickbait headlines." He's like, "They should just be true," which is that they should be baiting the click, but then when the person gets in, it's exactly what they thought it was going to be. The deception comes from when someone thinks it's something and it ends up being something different. That's where you have the conflict, right? And I think a lot of you do this. And part of the problem is when you make these outlandish claims, you actually decrease the audience's trust of you every time you make a claim and then you don't support it. So then why should they believe you the 27th time you have an outlandish headline for a short or a long that you make in your content when the other 26 times they didn't believe you because as soon as they clicked, they found out you were lying, right? Or fudging. Either way, not good. Now, if you're like, well, Alex, I don't have an aspirational outcome. Well, big thing is almost everyone has an aspirational outcome. You just need to get narrower on it. All right, so let me explain, and then I'll explain the second half, which is aspirational effort. But let's just focus on outcomes right now. So aspirational outcomes, you can be like, I am the fastest reader in all of Nevada in the second story of the acquisition.com building on the left wing. I'm probably the fastest reader. Okay, that's a world champ thing. So all we have to do is get narrower or more specific with our outcomes to make them more compelling. So we're still stating the facts and telling the truth. We're just leaning into our advantages, right? So if you happen to be, like I think Layla and I together are probably more unique than either of us apart, right? Otherwise, I'm just a 35-year-old white guy, right? And so I have basically nothing going for me in terms of being unique. There's plenty of 35-year-old rich white guys. But how many of them work with their wives? Okay. How many of them are Persian? Probably fewer. How many of them are first generation? Probably fewer. How many of them were self-made? Probably fewer. How many of them came from one space and did it in multiple spaces, in physical products and software and services? How many of them had brick and mortar experience? Not many, right? And so I can say things that no one else can say by just narrowing down and basically adding more color or nuance to the aspirational outcomes. You guys following along with this? Give me a little thumbsies, a onesie. Yeah, first on. Congratulations. Okay. Now, what many of you will be relegated to doing is, first off, you need to talk about whatever that aspirational outcome is. And again, you can still be mayor of a very small town. You just need to make the town small. So instead of trying to say that you make the best business content in the world, you're not going to do it because no one's going to believe you, right? You got to be the best business guy in the world or top 100, whatever, to make that kind of stuff. Now, most of the guys who aren't top business guys in the world, this is B2B, obviously, they're just actually independently famous because purely, and this is what I'm trying to like get across here. They are famous because of the outcome. Bezos is famous not because of his content. His content is famous because of what he's done. Jensen Huang is not famous because of his content and his clips. He's famous because of what he's done outside of social media, inside of the real world. Then people want to listen to you. And so the outcomes still matter. I don't care what other people tell you. The outcomes matter. They are the proof. They are the pudding. And so you have to double down on just niching down, just being narrower about what you can be exceptional at. Everyone can. It's just most people try to claim they're exceptional at too broad of a scope, and it makes it unbelievable. Now, the more successful you become in whatever your particular endeavor is, the more general your fiefdom, your kingdom that you're in charge of can be. And so if you look at my evolution from like local fitness celebrity, or rather local fitness authority, owned a gym, right? To then gym authority, okay? To a national education authority, right? To probably now international business, right? These are things that evolved in time, and they are step functions. Or sorry, they're stair steps. One has to come before the next. They are contingencies. One cannot happen without the other. And so if you're going to come into whatever space you're getting into, and you want to make content and be seen or perceived as an authority, the biggest way of doing that is accomplishing something. And then the next one, and this is now we can transition to aspirational effort, is going to be demonstration of expertise, right? So again, what we're trying to do, like, what is the function of authority? Let's think about this for a second. What is the function of authority? The function of authority is to decrease the amount of effort that someone needs to think about before they make a decision. So if I have a doctor who I'm listening to, and they tell me to do something, I can take it as fact because they're an authority. I will assume that I'm not going to, now I don't recommend doing that, but this is how people think. And so I'm going to not go through all the work of 8 years of education or whatever it is and the subspecialty in order to figure out what to do. Instead, I'm going to listen to an authority. So it's basically just a little click-word brain hijack of, oh, I don't need to think anymore, which, by the way, you totally should think. You should still think about what Warren Buffett says and say, do I believe what he says? Does it really apply to me? But most people won't. And we're talking about making money, so we don't fight with reality, okay? Now, if we want that, like, wouldn't it be nice if everyone just immediately did what you said? That would increase people's compliance with your request. This means that you'll be more persuasive. It means a higher percentage of people do what you say, which is good. It tends to be very functional for making money. Now, if we want to have authority, we can do the big thing. We can go build Berkshire Hathaway, right? Or we can demonstrate it by how in-depth we understand a topic. Now, that can be demonstrated without as much. It would make sense, though, that if you're very good at something that you would have some aspirational outcome, but it does serve as a proxy for expertise. You are obviously pretty good at this. Have you ever heard somebody like get really, I'm sure there's somebody you know, or maybe it's you, like if you get talking about some specific topic, people are like, geez, okay, I get it. Because at that point, they literally have told you, I think you're an authority. You can just tell me what you think, bottom line. They've literally elevated you within that tiny domain that you just demonstrated authority in or expertise in, that they will listen to what you say. So then around aspirational effort can be the inputs you do. So let me explain this. So you have the expertise that you can demonstrate. Now you want to demonstrate that expertise because it also serves as an approximation of the results or experience that someone would get after they buy your products. So people might read my book and be like, wow, that was a demonstration of expertise. I'll bet this guy can help me with my offers or whatever, right? And so then they would come into my rabbit hole, and then maybe we'd invest in them or whatever, right? But that's the idea. Now, if that book on offers was mediocre, then they might have a much lower likelihood of thinking that whatever I could do could help them, because they're like, oh, maybe a lot of stuff was obvious. And this is the second big problem, is that many of your content is obvious. Like if you had, here's 3 ways to save money on groceries, if I can immediately guess what they are without hearing from you, then they're not going to be interesting, they're not going to be unique, and they don't show nuance. All right. What makes content interesting is that someone can't guess what you're going to say. And if you're going to use lists, steps, or stories, you want to begin with the thing that is contrary to what they expect, which doesn't mean that you have to subvert the audience or like deceive them, but it should be something that they didn't expect you to say, which then should still be valuable, which makes it net new information. And one of the easiest ways to make net new information is to go deeper, not broader. So basically, the broader you go, the more it will rely on your aspirational outcome that you have, that people will then take what you say as fact or truth. If you don't have that, the deeper you will need to go with your content so that people believe that you have expertise. If you look at some of the, I specifically make deep videos and wide videos on purpose. And I will tell you the nirvana between the two, which this is a side quest bonus for everyone who's listening, is that you can have videos that are both deep and wide. So let me explain this. So a wide video, by my definition, only serves novices or beginners in a particular field. A deep video only serves advanced people within a particular domain or field. Now, a deep and wide video provides value to both. More difficult. Now, if I talk about allocation of resources and strategy, that is something that will likely benefit someone who's a beginner because they have resources and they need to allocate them the same way who someone who's advanced is. If I talk about talent, that'd be something that someone who's a beginner and advanced would need to navigate. Now, if I talk about scaling from 10 million a year in ad spend to 100 million a year in ad spend, that for sure will only apply to an advanced person. It is a demonstration of expertise, but the likelihood that someone even watches it or finds it is they're not going to find it relevant to them. On the flip side, if I talk about getting your first 5 customers, somebody who already has a business and has 100 customers, they're probably not going to be as interested in that, unless I can try and frame it in how to get your next 5 customers for any new division, new product line, or launch. Now, that would then allow me to maybe bridge some of that gap, but by and large, it'd still probably be a wide topic. And so the idea is, how can I be both deep and wide within my respective business? Okay, pin in that, back to the main quest. So if aspirational effort, which is demonstration of expertise, is something that can build our brands and can serve as a proxy, even if we don't have as many of those big aspirational outcomes, then one of the other things that we can do is literally demonstrate the effort we've put into it. So, for example, you talk about how you develop the expertise. And again, state the facts and tell the truth. If you are good at something, there's probably a reason you're good at it. And so most of you have a lot of really big marketing nuggets in your past, and you don't talk about them. It's actually a really common thing that I've noticed in talking to entrepreneurs, that there's this great scene in Mad Men where Don Draper is talking to the tobacco company, and he asked them to what they had some big campaign and he thought it sucked. And so he wanted to reinvent it. And so he asked them nuanced questions, step by step. How do you make your tobacco? How is it different than anyone else's? And so as they go through, they're like, we pretty much do it the same way as everyone else. He keeps digging. And then finally they say, okay, so we dry it out and then we put it in the sun and we toast it. And he's like, oh, it's toasted. And so it being toasted, that unique moment in their process, was a differentiator. And so many of you have an it's toasted in your past. You might be the only black belt in your local area, right? Now, there might be many black belts, but within your little fiefdom of men over 40 or of people in St. Louis, Missouri, you might be only one of 3. It's a much smaller space to compete in. And so now we have this tiny mini outcome as outcome. What did we do to get there? Well, it's like, oh, well, I studied for 10 years. It's like, dude, tell people the aspirational effort, the price you paid for the information, learning, education, and expertise that you have. And so right now, like this is the takeaway here, all right, probably biggest one for most of you guys, is write through or write down all the things that you went through to develop the expertise you have. And so if you've worked with 100 customers, talk about it. If you did, 5 years of studying, talk about what you studied and the nuances of what you learned. Because guess what? No one else is. And you certainly aren't. And that would then demonstrate, okay, maybe they haven't had this thing happen, but they've done a lot of work around this, right? And so if you think about what content provides people, it's typically compressed time. All right. Now, this is from an education perspective, not entertainment. Entertainment, different. But education-wise, we want to compress time. Like the reason humanity exists and that we pass generation to generation is that we learn stuff and we pass on that knowledge so people can start where we left off. Fundamentally, that's how education works. And so, if the first guy who figured out, Pythagoras figured out this theorem, we don't re-derive the theorem. We just learn the answer. And then using that theorem, we find out more information. And so it is so valuable because of how hard and how long it was to figure it out. But then we give the kernel, that tiny little nugget of wisdom, and that becomes significantly more valuable because of the time and effort we save our audience. And so when we make these aspirational pieces of content from an effort perspective, we want to demonstrate the cost that we are saving them in effort and time. Now, the authority piece becomes the third component. If you're noticing common themes with the value equation here, it's because that's what makes things valuable. Things can be valuable that are also free. Duh. Actually, let me highlight that really quickly. The value equation applies to content. How do I get something valuable? They have a dream outcome. They have something they're trying to achieve. I decrease their risk. How do I decrease the risk? By demonstrating expertise, by having an outcome that they say, oh, that's aspirational. If it worked at that 10x level, it'll work at 1x level for me, right? They have other people who are like me that they tell stories about that are relevant to me. So this applies. These are all things that increase perceived likelihood. Then we've got time delay. How long did it take him to learn this? How many different customers? How long would it take me to learn this on my own? Time that we're giving them, fast. And then we've got easy, which is how difficult do you make it for someone to comprehend? Now, I'm going to give you two versions of this, a little bit more advanced. If you want people, you will be more persuasive based on how well your target audience can understand you. So there's a reason that I speak in a third grade reading level to the greatest degree possible. It's because I can be more persuasive because a higher percentage of the population understands what I'm saying. Now, if you speak to an audience of, let's say, crochet people who knit, I may use analogies that would be about knitting to illustrate a point because it's something they understand. And so the more we can pre-digest the food, the more we can chew it up for them and then just give them just the nugs. We can pan the gold, we can pan the sand for the gold and then just give them the gold. The more we can pre-digest it, the more valuable it becomes. And so many of you have zero aspirational outcomes, not because you haven't done it, because you don't talk about it. And you have zero aspirational effort, not because you aren't working hard, but because no one knows. The whole thing here is it's about the perception of your audience. So until they perceive it to be true, it's just as good as if it weren't. And so I hear this as this continuous talk track when I do the school days and things like that. Like, people don't respect all this work that I put in. And I'm like, you didn't tell them. How would they know? And so we want to integrate that stuff in. You weave it into either what you're talking about inside the content or what you have around the content. So there's a reason that my origin story is in the YouTube description of every video, because people are naturally asking, who is this guy? And so I just give my life story. Now, the reason I give it exactly like that is because it was the #1 performing LinkedIn post that I had over the last year. And I said, oh, well, if it worked on LinkedIn, I might as well put it as my YouTube description, right? It also doubles as an autobiography. And so it gave people a fast track of relevance for me and why I might be an authority within a particular space. And so now we covered aspirational outcomes. We covered aspirational effort. We talked about increments versus order of magnitude. This is a way to increase the order of magnitude, way more traffic that would come to you based on the content. Okay, so the next one is pre versus post. So with this contextual foundation that we just laid, is we have to talk about stuff, we have to make it valuable, we have to make the value happen in the way that I just outlined. Then what we need to do is make sure that we have basically as little of everything else inside the content as possible, and clearly state that at the beginning. And the only way that you're going to do this is if you work more before you start a video or before you make a post on LinkedIn or X or whatever. And so the easiest way to do this is look at other types of high-performing content that exist on that platform and say, is there versions of this that I can model using my story? Because there are going to be formats, there are going to be packaging concepts that tend to perform better. And so all we do is we take that packaging or structure and we apply it to our truth, our reality, our history, our demonstration of expertise. And then that's what merges you outside of the platform with what works inside of the platform. And then you'll get more views, more shares, more leads, more traffic, right? And so the final question that I will lead you or leave you with is, what would it take? It's probably my single favorite question of all time, which is a pretty bold thing to say, but it's probably my favorite question of all time, because what would it take assumes success. So if I said, what would it take for you to 10x your audience? You will then start answering that question. And then you get to see if the resources required to answer that question are under your control. And if you have access to those resources, then the question is there anything that you could do that would more than 10x your business given those resources? And if the answer is no, then you should redeploy those resources towards 10xing your business and using it in the way that you just solved. And so for many of you, if, like, I know Evelyn talked about this, she's like, well, when I win the 100, that would be something that would be very good for my brand, for my reputation. Yes. And so she's deploying all of her resources into winning that title. And so many of you have these micro titles, these things that can happen that are under your control that you're choosing not to because you just haven't actually tabulated what it would take. And you might find that what it would take is actually very much in your control. And I will share this with you, which is that a lot of very successful entrepreneurs started with the exact same amount of stuff that you have right now, which may be nothing. And so the only thing that they had that you might lack is resourcefulness more than resources. They were willing to look at whatever they could to assemble the resources to then do what it took. And so if you think about content from this perspective, I think that you will make far better stuff and people will believe you. The better stuff is going to come from using the value equation. How do I link to this their dream outcome? How do I make this risk-free for them to consume or execute this content? How do I make their outcome happen faster? How do I make it easier? If you think about that with each form of content that you make, even put the little 4 box, think about each 4 of them, right? And if you're like, man, that sounds like work, welcome to winning, right? I mean, I'm sure Kirby, because he was making YouTube videos before this, like the amount of time that it takes to make a banger video that's a 1 million view video compared to a 100K video might not be 10x. It might be 100x the time. And you have to be okay with that. Oftentimes though, it's more like it takes 3 times as long to make a 1 million view video than a 100K video. And so you actually get a very big arbitrage on working a little bit harder on making it that much better. Because a video that gets 10% more clicks and 10% longer watch time isn't just going to be, 1.1 times 1.1 bigger. It's probably going to be closer to like double the size. And this is why the best creators over time oftentimes make fewer pieces that just perform better, because they realize the outsized returns of quality over quantity. Now, in the beginning, you need to do a lot of reps because you probably suck. But once you understand it, almost all of them follow this path, which is like they start making some, they start making more, they make even more. And it happens as this accordion. So it's like, man, I got to 10 pieces of content a week and these 2 outperformed my other 8 entirely. Well, I'll bet you I could make 4 pieces that good if I didn't have to make 10. So then you drop to 4 and then all 4 of those are good. And then you're like, man, if I went from 4 back to 10 at this level, I would double my views. And then you do. And then you're at 10 and then 2 of those ones are the best ones. And you're like, man, if I only made things like that, I would. So you basically accordion in and out over your career. So this is a very common thing that happens. So I'm setting this as a precedent that you're not doing anything wrong and that there is no perfect ratio of content that you're going to make. It just comes down to how good it is. And most of it being good comes down to giving away your best stuff, which is giving away the secrets, the nuances that make a big difference in a customer's life and just showing them. This is where you demonstrate expertise. What most people do is give away fluff and are surprised they get fluff back. If you give away meat, You'll get meat back. You'll get real contacts that are actually interested. And then it forces you to continue to level up how you can provide value. Because if that's the only value you can provide, guess what you need to do? Figure out how to provide more value. Because whenever you solve one problem, another problem will always emerge. That's the one fact that I can give you when it comes to capitalism, is that customers will never be satisfied. There will always be unsatisfied customers. Customers will always happily want you to solve their next problem if you just solved their last one the way they wanted to be solved at a price they found valuable. All right, so that is my TLDR. I'll give you one more quick nug that I gave some of the guys who were at the Skool day, which is I would recommend having some single platform that is your platform of truth. It's your primary source, and it'll typically be the one that you consume most often, that you're most native on. So I'm not like, as much as the hypothetical of go find the one that works best and then do more of that. I think in actuality, most of the time your skill is going to be so much outsized on the type of platform you consume that it makes sense to start there. So for example, Layla's primary content source is her podcast. And she's a longtime podcast listener. And so when she made her own podcast, she knows what she likes about podcasts and doesn't like about podcasts. And she has her podcast is disproportionately better than mine. Mine's a little bigger than hers is, but by proportion, hers is way better. If she had my overall following, my podcast would be 3 times bigger if I had her relative metrics. And that's because it's her native platform. X, for example, for me, is actually my best platform if you control for the amount of people who are on X. So X is a much smaller platform than like Instagram is or YouTube. But proportionally, I actually have more followers on X than I do on any other. And so I say this just, again, as a general idea that I start at X because that's where I make my stuff. That's where I consume the majority of my content. And so I create there, and then it gets pushed all over. And so I think that you want to get as close to authentic, as close to you, as far away from ChatGPT bullshit. Because think about this. If you use ChatGPT to make content, so can everyone else. And so the things that ChatGPT can't do is tell you what you've done and tell you who you are. And so you want to use those unique differentiators to be the things that make your content stand out, right? Obviously, ChatGPT can lie, which we already know, right? But that's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying you state the facts and tell the truth in a way that no one else knows. Tell your story. Tell the work that you did to get to where you're at. And if you haven't done any work, get working so that you can tell that story. So if you're written, you can just use the words as scripts and as posts and as tweet reels and as captions and as emails and as LinkedIn posts and as Facebook posts. If you're just great on video, which is amazing, that's actually not the first thing I did. I'm written form is my favorite communication style. Then if you're video first, you're lucky because you got audio immediately ripped. You've got transcriptions you can have, and then you have the video itself. It's already done. Like, that's amazing. If you're a podcast person like Layla, she takes the words, they transcribe it, they YouTubeify that into a script, and they make that her YouTube videos, and then they clip shorts from there. So I say this more so to say that you need to naturally derive your content creation methodology based on the platform or style of, or medium rather, of communication that you natively prefer, what you naturally already do. You probably communicate in one way or another. Now, if you have absolutely zero, you've lived under a rock your whole life, you've never been on a social platform, then just figure out, am I better at talking in front of a camera? Am I better at just, talking not in front of a camera? Or am I better at writing? If you can figure that out, then you can kind of reverse engineer, okay, which of the platforms has the highest percentage of my potential audience on there? And then you can make content for them on that platform and then redistribute it across the others. If you're starting out and you have low resources, then just stick to the one you have until you're at about $1 million a year. Because any platform on earth, on social media, well, of the big ones, I'll say the top 10 social media platforms, any of them can make you a millionaire. You don't need to do more than one. You can just do one and get $2 million a year, which is almost everybody here's goal that I listen to. Okay, let's rock and roll, my friends. Do you guys like this style, by the way? Thanks, Yaya. Dude, Yaya, you're fastest gun of the West. Look at your bank account. Now look at mine. Now look at your bank account. Now back to mine. Sadly, it doesn't look like mine, but it could if you joined Skool. Come with me. Where are you? You're at a party, but not just any party, your party, and you get to decide who's invited. You can come in, my dear. You cannot. Give me your money. And because it's your party, it can be free or it can be paid. It's up to you. And you're talking about whatever you want to talk about because it's your party. Learning and having fun. But don't believe me,
Look at these numbers. This is the real leaderboard from last month. And sure, I could talk about Bill, who's making $62,000 a month, helping people bookkeep better. Or Jamie, helping women invest, making $41,000 a month. But what about the average Skool community? Well, the average paid community makes $1,360 per month. How about them apples? What's that? The ticket to the thing that you've always wanted to go to. My headquarters here in Vegas. Become one of the top 10 communities and you can fly out. Look, over there. The ticket is now a torch. No, it's an engagement ring to the business of your dreams so that you can marry it forever. Because 1 out of 2 businesses on Skool create money online. Anything is possible on Skool. Click the link to start for free.